Say you.
Only a few descendants of West African slaves remain on a coastal Georgia portion of land called Sapelo Island. In the early 1800s, ancestors of the Gola-Kizi community were brought to these barrier islands along the nation's southeast coast to work on plantations. These slaves acquired land on the island, but now decades later, that ownership is being threatened. Many of the residents say they've been squeezed out due to deliberate tax hikes and gentrification of the area.
We used to be 13 solid communities of black family members on this island, now reduced to one.
I'm Eddie Robinson, and stay tuned as ICU explores the African cultural heritage of the Gola-Kizi. We'll meet one of the descendants of the enslaved, Reginald Hall. What will it take for his people to hold on to their legacy? Oh yeah, I feel you. We hear you. I see you.
Beulah land, Beulah land. I got a home over at Beulah land, Beulah land, Beulah land. I got a home over at Beulah land.
You're listening to ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson. As we explore a narrative of a group of individuals we certainly don't get to hear from often. They're publicly known as the Gullah-Geechee community, but here at ICU, we've been informed that they're more accurately referred to as the Gola-Kizi community. Well, first off, who are they? Well, they're descendants of West Africa who were enslaved on island plantations along the lower southeastern Atlantic coast around the 1800s. States where they ended up enslaved consisted of North and South Carolina, Florida, and the coastal parts of Georgia. They were known as rice cultivators, where the warm, humid, moist climate helped them preserve many of their vibrant, rich African traditions. This distinctive group of communities have stuck together throughout the centuries, and they've managed to maintain and preserve their African cultural heritage and lifestyle. Until now. Sapelo Island, a barrier island on the Georgia coastline, is the site of Hog Hammock, the last known Gola community. Along Sapelo Island, you'll find developers and real estate personnel who are all on a mission to gentrify and literally take over much of the island. Many of the Gola-Kizi family feel that they're being squeezed out of the land they say is rightfully theirs, and litigation is ongoing. Here to shed more light on the culture, offer up a bit more color on the richness and resources of that coastal region, as well as provide us with an update of what their plans are to preserve and protect the land of their ancestors, we're so grateful to have with us Reginald Hall. He's part of the Gola-Kizi community, and he's one of the dozens of residents looking to hold on to their land, their culture, and their livelihood. Reginald Hall, thank you for being a guest on ICU.
Good afternoon, Eddie. Thank you for having us.
Reginald Hall is also an advocate of the Gola-Kizi community for civil and human rights. Let's begin our chat by helping us understand more about the history of the Gola-Kizi people.
We're Gola from the sections of Africa known as Angola, and Kizi, which we come out of the Kizi tribe of the Mandinka out of Timbo, Guinea. When you look again at the tribal understandings of where we come from, we still have the Kizi tribe in existence today in the Timbo, Guinea, Sierra Leone areas. When you understand that through memory eradication is the reason that most of us cannot go to a cemetery as black folk here in the United States of America and trace our ancestry back 5 or 6 generations. The problem with not recognizing who we are, we can no longer recognize where we're supposed to be heading.
Explain to our listeners how this land, this coastal region, was actually acquired in the first place. You know, how did your ancestors and other descendants acquire this land?
Incredible story right there.
And it impacts the nature of what's going on now.
On many levels, you're absolutely correct. But let me show you how this started. 1865, we know emancipation came about. My family members between 1865 and 1871 purchased these lands with American currency after having the insight of developing their own corporation through the Georgia Secretary of State. I'm talking about 1871, bruh. Creating what was known as the Hillary and Company. 3 of my family member elders' ancestors developed this company, decided that they was going to purchase this land and pay down a $5,000 debt to the bank because they then took 702 acres and put them between 20 different family units. Each one of those family units paid Hillary and Company, the 3 owners, the 3 men who started this, paid them a nominal fee for their land for 5 years. They gave that bank $5,000 and had the deeds to those lands in their hand. Now that's 5 years after emancipation. So you have introduced me as Reginald Hall. My great-grandfather changed our name as our last name from Hogg, Hogg, because my family members took care of the hogs on the plantation. My great-grandfather bought his first piece of land here on Sapelo, and he changed our name from Hogg to Hall. But before doing that, he lent our name to the community of Hogg, Hogg, Hummock, Hummock. Hogg, Hog, as it's represented in all writings about Sapelo, is spelled Hog. That's an animal. That's not how my grandfather would describe himself as an animal. And hummock versus hammock. A hummock is a raised piece of forested land surrounded by marsh. A hammock, something swing in your backyard. But the sign in our community was paid for and put up by the new neighbor, not one of us. So they changed the name as the new neighbor to Hog, the animal, Hammock. We're Hog Hummock. But yes, we reside in Sapelo Island in Hog Hummock community. We have about a population of 70 residents in Hog Hummock community. Of those residents, 39 of my family members are left on this island, down from upwards of 2,500 people. Not 39 households, 39 black bodies. That's all that remains. The rest of them are considered our new neighbors. Our new neighbors are considered new neighbors as unfriendly neighbors. They have come in, they have built palatial estates, raising the land value. And in 2020-22, everybody knows when you raise the land value, you immediately raise the taxes. But the problem with our new neighbors is they are in collaboration with state agencies and county agencies in even having the ability to build these palatial estates, because the county code says, as the first paragraph, the code is being developed as to not force the indigenous population off of the island due to land value increase. Now that's what it says in the McIntosh County 16.1 code section.
It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with Reginald Hall, one of the last few Gullah-Keezy descendants living along the southeastern coastal region of Georgia in an area known as Sapelo Island.
The land owned by Gullah-Keezy consists of 702 acres of land, which is valued at $1.4 billion.
That's the land that we are now going as land recovery efforts through demand letter or litigation that we're going after now. But that land, none of us reside on that area known as Raccoon Bluff. None of my family members live in that area, yet we had lived there from 1801 up until 1926, 27. So that land is outside of Hog Hummock. We used to be 13 16 solid communities of black family members on this island, now reduced to one. We owned, with deeds in our hand, a landmass of upwards of 3,000 acres, now down to 192.
Why is Sapelo Island so valuable, Reginald Hall? Tell us more about the resources and the richness of this coastal region.
It is the last intact Gola-Kizhi community on any island in the United States of America. That's number one. We still are living and practicing our African ways as a community. Number two, our dirt is so full of the most beautiful black nitrate dirt you've ever seen in your life. We can grow heads of broccoli that weigh 12, 15 pounds. I just told you I was out here in the sugarcane fields. I grow purple ribbon sugarcane. Sapelo Island is the only place in America known to truly nurture and stand our stalks 6 to 10 feet tall, 3 to 5 inches in diameter, with some of the sweetest sugarcane you ever had in your life. The land is so valuable right now because we still do not have a road that comes over to this island. The ferry ride, without the intrusion of what we know as a time schedule, the ferry ride is the most beautiful thing because you're looking at this landmass from the mainland as you're traveling across the Doughboy Sound, and you're seeing it as you get up on it, and then you get here and we are undeveloped. No pesticides have ever touched these lands as a commercial grade. We have no car accidents. We have no stop signs. We have no street lights. We have no stop lights, nothing like that. We have dirt roads that encompass most of our land. Why is it so valuable? It's the last island left where the oppressor has not stolen it all away from us, the black folk, on any of these barrier islands running from Martha's Vineyard all the way down to Florida. Now, when I tell you about Martha's Vineyard being the exact same thing Sapelo Island is, no boat, no road going to Martha's Vineyard. You got to take ferries. And the land value on Martha's Vineyard starts at $3 million an acre. Well, here on Sapelo Island, with the last 13 years of Babylon that I brought to the oppressor, it now has raised the value for the new neighbors of $1 million an acre. If you go up on the north end of the island, we're at $2 million an acre. So with it being undeveloped, the oppressor sees that they have a blank canvas that they can make their new Hilton Head Islands out of, or St. Simon Islands, or Jekyll Islands that have already been taken from us. But we stopping the ball from rolling over this one, Brother Ed.
Coming up, we continue our chat with Reginald Hall, a Gola-Kizhi descendant and resident of Sapelo Island, who's holding on to his ancestors' land, an area rich in resources and culture. We'll learn more about the problems and challenges they're facing as efforts relating to gentrification and modernization threaten their survival, where developers and other entities look to strategically squeeze them off their family land. Who are these developers, and what more can we find out about the very people, including state, local, and regional leaders and agencies, who all have a vested interest in obtaining this last stretch of land from the Gola-Kizhi community? I'm Eddie Robinson. I see you. We'll return in just a moment. If you're enjoying this program, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, I See You with Eddie Robinson. You can hear all the past episodes and be notified when new episodes are released. Also, please take a minute to give us a review or comment. We love getting feedback from our listeners.
one that some of my people came to about Oglethorpe time. That it's the prettiest name and maybe the prettiest island. It's called the Sapelo. Toombs County Farm, 34. Jack Boss laying dead down the Cotton Road. Long John's running, where's he gonna go? I bet he's gone down to the Sapelo.
It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're so grateful to have with us Reginald Hall, who's a descendant of the Gullah Keezy community. Hall says the state of Georgia, along with others, are trying to squeeze out what few descendants who remain on the island, and they've been doing this for decades, as development policies, along with confusing property law and land ownership rights issues, have all been considered roadblocks for them. And we're just hearing out Reginald Hall's story, and he's here to speak his truth and explain to us what's really going on along the coastal regions of Georgia. And we're asking any of the officials associated with the state of Georgia, if you'd like to be a future guest of ICU, we welcome you with open arms to discuss and learn more as relates to your side of the narrative. In the meantime, we're grateful for Mr. Hall for his time in guiding us through the current plight of the Gullah Keezy community.
The government is directly involved with this island through what is known as Department of Natural Resources and the Sapelo Island Heritage Authority, created in legislation in 1983. The legislation said we are creating this agency as an arm of Georgia's government to protect and nurture, preserve the lands for the Gullah Keezy people on Sapelo Island. Never once did they do that. It has turned into nothing but a land bank that they are now, as the state of Georgia, per every sitting governor since 1983, has an opportunity to chair this authority. And the only thing that they have done with our lands is collected them and now begun trading lands, leasing lands to the Caucasian developers.
And that land is approximately, let's speak numbers here, 97% owned by the state of Georgia, and it's managed by the Georgia Department of Natural Resources. The remainder of the island that's under private ownership, that ownership is currently being contested. Is that correct?
No. The ownership that we now have as less than 1% is not being contested.
Oh, okay.
That's
So it's even
here.
less.
That's here in the Hog Hummock subdivision. The lands that are being contested are the 13 communities which run south to north throughout the island.
Mhm.
This island is the size of Manhattan. We're 11 and a half miles long, 4.5 miles wide, encompassing 17,650 acres. On Sapelo, our strategy is to recover 12 communities and reestablish them with our people who were there in the beginning. But the strategy also is inside of creating this model that says to the other communities along this coast, here's what we did. Give us a call. Allow us to assist you in your process, because remember, we're not here to help nobody. The indigenous population of Queensland said, if you're here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if your freedoms are aligned with mine, then we're going to work together. I'm creating this model to say, I, meaning the initiative, creating this model to say, here, my people along the coast, or here, my people on the inland, where we've lost 14 million acres as Gullah Geechee people from North Carolina down to Florida. Here's the model. And call us, because we're willing to come and align with your freedom.
Got it.
But if we cover the last most important part of the strategy, it's also to start protecting our burial grounds. Just here on this island, if my family member's been here since 1796, 1801, how come I can't go to the grave of my great-great-grandparents? Because the state mowed down the headstones and stole the land. But we're hearing this as a prevalent cause of action throughout the United States of black cemeteries. There again, Dr. Asa Hilliard will tell you, You don't have the cemetery to take your children to. That's a form of memory eradication. How will they ever know?
One of the concerns related to Sapelo Island has to do with access. And there are no roads that take you directly to the island. And I'm under the impression that means visitors, from what I read, must pre-register. And a person or a group of people must participate in one of the tours offered up by the state in order to get there. Correct?
Let's deal with that. One of my cousins runs a tourism business here on this island. But because of the steering process, if a realtor takes you and shows you a home and says, no, you really don't want to, they're trying to steer you out of that area because you're black. Well, the steering process over here is, let's steer all of the tours to the state. Let's steer all of the tours to the University of Georgia, which they have a marine biology institute over here, who have never since 1959 offered our children one day open house for any educational purpose. There is a movement in the United States known as bridging the gap between community and university. They've never attempted that. Moreover, they've attempted to keep us off of the area that they lease from the state, which is our lands that the state stole. If we talk about that transportation system, after they steer the tours away from us, after they steer the population to the state agencies that are doing their tours, then in order to keep us even more economically subdued through tourism, they have created this ferry system that does not allow us to have proper engagement of transportation to get tourists back and forth. But moreover, on that transportation system, it says you cannot live as a black man or woman on this island and count on that state-run ferry to get a job on the mainland. Savannah's 60 miles away, so if you got a 9 to 5, how you going to drive an hour and a half at a 5 o'clock closing time of your business to make it back to that ferry and get back home? Well, Brunswick, Georgia, as our next metropolitan, is no better in economics or travel time, so you can't get no 9 to 5 off this island and come back home. What's the worst part of that? The state, as the ferry system operator, does not run the ferry on any federal holiday. So that means our elders, our children, our middle-aged, they can't come together on this island unless they plan on, number one, spending that night before the ferry opens up the following day. Or we can't get off this island to go have Christmas dinner with our family members and come back home. You got to plan on getting a hotel room or spending the night. These are the low quality of life reference points that they placed in front of us to make sure that we have little to no survival ability.
Now, as part of the initiative to keep and hold on to this coastal region, will there be plans to explore that ferry schedule becoming more frequent?
What has just happened, I created a Senate bill resolution in 2012 called Senate Bill Resolution 727. I'm going to answer your question directly, saying there is an opportunity for us through legislation to create a study committee that should have House and Senate representation. We did everything we could through public policy before litigation. We have a brother that came along, passed on to us, I know from the ancestors, by the name of Reed Colfax, and his Georgia associate, Robert Jackson, as law firms have come along and in 8 years have spent $13 million on us, no request of money returned, and have literally stuck next to us on every battle that's come up. So when we started this litigation, the brother Reed Colfax, as I began making all this noise, Brother Eddie, this county says, well, we better go ahead and tax them out now. So in 2012, the county raised our taxes upwards of 3,000%. Our lawyers immediately took this on, no questions asked, and won our tax case where we literally recovered $750,000 as the largest tax settlement of any black family in the United States of America. I make these points to say there are people out here who care. They're not just in it for the money, because what I'm telling you now were part of the problems. But over the last 13 years, we've come up with the solutions, Brother Eddie. But one of our concerns is a movement now called aging in place. Well, what the state and the county and the developer has done to us has caused our elders to have to leave this island. Why would they have to leave the island? No social activity, no health care, no educational activity. Then they didn't even have the ability to get on and off the boat without being lifted in a wheelchair by hands of men or laid all the way back. Now we have a hydraulic lift for them to put the wheelchairs in, which makes the elders feel safer. Our docks have now been redone at the tune of $8.6 million on this side, and now they're going into the new work on the mainland side at $4.19 million.
You're listening to I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with Reginald Hall. He's one of the last descendants of enslaved Africans who live along the coastal regions of Georgia, known as the Gullah-Keezy community. They've owned land out there since the 1800s, and many have been fighting for years to prevent their land from being taken away from them due to gentrification and so-called inheritance laws, where documentation would be required as proof of land ownership. Well, in many instances, land would be handed down through verbal agreements. So, in essence, no written documentation would be available, thereby creating a loophole for investors to grab that property. Well, ICU is asking any agency official of the state of Georgia, developers associated with areas that are a part of Sapelo Island, even family members of slave owners of the Gullah-Keezy from back in the day. If you'd like to be a future guest of ICU, we welcome you with open arms to discuss and learn more as it relates to what's really going on along the coastal lands of Georgia. In the meantime, we continue our conversation with one of the residents and critical stakeholders of the contested land, Reginald Hall.
Getting back to the conflict, what concerns me is what's going on and what's been happening on this island as it relates to the children that are on the island. How do they gain access to their education?
Got to take a deep breath on that, Brother Eddie, because that's the most upsetting thing to me of this whole process. Our children are forced to take this ferry across the water where they meet the school bus. But I told you that ferry last run from the mainland to the island is at 5:30. Our children cannot participate in the after-school programs. They can't go to the Friday night games or the volleyball games or become football players or basketball, because those practices usually entail you having to be there after hours. Well, our children have to get back on that ferry unless you have somebody on the mainland that you can stay with, but then you have to leave your family at home. Well, this has been a cause of action since my father came out of the 6th grade in the 1930s. He had to leave the island to go stay on the mainland to continue his education through middle school and high school. So this is a family displacement process that eradicates more of our family unity. So that's horrible that we can't allow the 5 or 6 children left on the island to participate in what most normal school settings would be, to at least be part of the high school, grade school process of after-school activities.
There's that sigh that you said I was going to take.
Hey, I've heard it 3 times from you, but believe me, brother, when people talk to me, I have to give them the truth, and I get it every day. Oh, Mr. Hall, I can't believe this in 2022.
And that's what well, you know what? It almost doesn't surprise me, because you mentioned this metropolitan community earlier. You mentioned Brunswick, Georgia. That's where my aunt and her kids used to live. And of course, you know, if Brunswick sounds familiar to many of you that are listening, that's also the area close to where 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, a black man who was shot and killed in February of 2020 during a racially motivated attack where 3 white men chased Arbery as he was jogging through a neighborhood in Glenn County. No arrests were made until graphic video leaked online nearly 2 months after the incident. Those men were convicted of murder last fall in a Georgia state courthouse, and in February of this year, they were found guilty of federal hate crimes after a second trial in U.S. District Court.
I'm going to stand in something that I hadn't told you yet, but Ahmaud Arbery's father is my second cousin. They come from Sapelo Island, just so that you know that. So we're intrinsically involved.
Interesting. Wow. So putting all of that in context, the nature of those incidents and how it all unfolded, you can't just acknowledge the fact that 3 white men attacked a black man while jogging. But it took a leaked video, several trials, district court involvement, federal court involvement, extensive media coverage, all of that to get to where Arbery found some form of justice. And in essence, you really have to put all of those components into perspective as it relates to understanding the context of what port communities are dealing with, the environment, the energies that are taking place out there along the coastal state of Georgia. And you mentioned to me that it took, 13 years of litigation to get to where you are now, and there's still points where I'm going to call it the powers that be are still squeezing individuals and residents off that island. And you mentioned this earlier, but I want you to be crystal clear. Who are those powers that be? And what's going on with the roadblocks?
If you are looking at the players,
Yes.
these players are called multi-millionaire dollar developers, most of them stemming out of Macon, Georgia. These players are inside of the federal courthouses. We got our first federal judge on our case. I got her recused because I found out as the federal judge on our case, she failed to mention that she and her brother own land on Sapelo. We got her immediately recused, had an opportunity to get us a new judge who put back in all of the stuff that the first judge illegally threw out. Now, that's one player. As developers, she and her brother are developers in terms of their LLC here on the island where they developed a house. You're dealing with the governor of the state as the chairman of the Sapelo Island Heritage Authority. You're dealing with the Department of Natural Resources Commissioner, Mark Williams, as the overseer of DNR. You're dealing with Wildlife Resources Division, all of the heads of those agencies. We're dealing with EPD, which is known as our Environmental Protection Agency Division, still under the governor. Then, one of the largest LLCs down here that has built the illegal home had a representative as their chief financial officer known by the name of Sam A. Nunn Jr. Now, he's a 24, 25 sitting congressional senator for the state of Georgia that has his name on an illegally developed house as a chief financial officer. What I've now described Sapelo Island as is political influence peddling. Let's take it to the county. We got the county commissioners, the county building, zoning, and ordinance department, and the county inspectors with the county lawyer who have not stopped the developers from violating their own policy that they wrote. So we have government officials, we call that public corruption, in collaborative scheme with the developers to run us off of this island. Under the United States Department of Justice, if they've done that for 2 or more years to deprive the Gullah-Keezy people on Sapelo, they have now violated the federal act known as Racketeering Influence Conspiracy Act, RICO. Now, this is real. The only reason we have not been able to bring the RICO case is due to the lack of funding for saying, here you go, Mr. Lawyer. Here goes $250,000. We want you to prove this RICO case. I've already proved it. but I'm a layman.
Coming up, our final segment as we continue our chat with Reginald Hall, a descendant of the Gullah-Keezy community, who's also an advocate for civil and human rights. Are there any Gullah-Keezy community members who've given up and said we're tired of fighting and they've abandoned their property altogether? And for those like Reginald Hall who are vowing to remain on the island, are there any measures underway to protect the sanctity of land owned by the Gullah-Keezy community? I'm Eddie Robinson. I See You will return right after this. If you're enjoying this program, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, I See You with Eddie Robinson. You can hear all the past episodes and be notified when new episodes are released. Also, please take a minute to give us a review or comment. We love getting feedback from our listeners.
Oh, day, yonder come daylight. Oh, day, yonder come daylight. Oh, day, yonder come daylight. Daylight go in my soul.
You're listening to I See You. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're wrapping up our chat right now with Reginald Hall. He's a resident of Sapelo Island, a state-protected barrier island located in McIntosh County, Georgia. He's also a descendant of the Gullah-Keezy community. They came to this island as slaves back in the 1800s and made it their home. Many have remained on these barrier islands along the southeastern coast of the country for years, developing and preserving a rich culture of their own, filled with distinctive music, language, arts, crafts, and amazing food. Descendants have been fighting private investors, developers, and regional officials and agencies for decades, hoping to hold on to their lives and livelihood and leave a long-lasting legacy for generations to come. Reginald Hall has been a guest on our show, and he's been naming names of those who he says are the leading oppressors, and he's sharing details about the Gullah-Keezy plight, as well as their continued fight for the land they call home. He, along with several others, including community leaders and attorneys, have been offering up their services free of charge for over 13 years. I See You as we conclude our discussion with Reginald Hall.
Are you seeing any conflicts with the Gullah-Keezy people themselves on the island? Whereas some might be tired of fighting, just want to sell. Look, I'm tired of being tired. While others may look to continue the fight and build up the local economy, perhaps even persuade their children to stay and maintain a life there on the island, raise a family. Do you find yourself having to convince many to stay, while others have basically made up their minds to leave?
Whew, that's a three-prong right there. Let me start it with this. Divide and conquer, right? It's part of the systemic plan of the oppressor. We know that. So we're working through our family issues on, how would I say that? A slow walk it down process. We slow walk down here. If you look at the removal of the population, it's not because they wanted to leave. It was because of force. No jobs, no economics. You control the transportation. You control the barge, which would mean import-export is almost unlikely to happen because of the astronomical rate they charge on that barge, $3,000 just to get your stuff. If you're wanting to do this type of stuff, to get your stuff over, you got to pay $3,000 on a round trip. The barge is also a private contract now. In the last 13 years became private, where if the state pays the barge man to come over here and pick up the trash off the island, and there's plenty of room left on the barge, he's double dipping and charging us to put our vehicles on the island, which is an illegal process, but nobody can hear that yet. And those are intrinsic valued issues, but we can't cover everything when we have to start at the top and then come down to that low-hanging fruit. If you look at, let me finish the last part of your question. If you think of how we're being handled, and let's be clear, we're only being handled. because of the rapid ongoing gentrification process. Most of our family members had to live through Jim Crow on this island. Most of our family members had to live through enslavement on this island. So when you get to a certain point, you said it, tired of being here, tired of going through this. And I'm not saying it's easier on the mainland, but it sure is not as clustered as, a one cluster versus 20 clusters on the mainland. You only got one cluster here. So everything that's coming at you comes to that one cluster. Then, because our elders left the island, they didn't come back with their children or their grandchildren. They don't really understand the value of our ecosystem or the value of our unity for the storytelling or the value of what we truly have here, because they haven't been able to come home and see it as I had the opportunity and a lot of our family members had the opportunity. But where will they build if they come back if all of our land has been stolen? So we created SALT, Sapelo Ancestral Land Trust. This land trust would avail us the ability to recover the lands, collect them on an minimal tax burden, and say, okay, family member, now as the land trust, we can lease you this land. You can build this house, which will belong to you in perpetuity, the house, but you can never sell the land. The land trust then convenes a board that would have a quorum that now talks about the workforce development in terms of land accumulation or the cultural heritage tourism that can also become the incubator for a training program for returning descendants, or what you might look at as our culinary arts, our ring shout, that's our dance and music that we do, or our basket weaving, our fishing expertise. We still drag 100 to 300 foot net out in the ocean and come in with a bounty for over 100 people if you want to talk about that. So these are the quality of life improvement issues that we have to handle in terms of housing development and the cultural aesthetics of not removing the indigenous population to land value increase.
It's ICU. I'm Eddie Robinson, and we're speaking with a descendant of the Gullah-Keezy community on Sapelo Island, Reginald Hall.
And it sounds like there are plans in place, even for those who may have left the island already to return once many of these legal matters are settled. There are plans in place to accommodate them through this trust.
Yes, the Raccoon Hall Community Development Corporation is what I formed as let's just say, an agency to do the work, to bring the information and the initiative that says, let's create the economic, what you might call circle, tourism, agriculture, aquaculture. There's so many cultures. This is an open air museum as an island. And there's so many cultures. You got the new dew nets. They have dew nets where we can collect all of the rainwater now that can propel some of our solar power that the state has no interest in because it would be another part of our survival. We have these vehicles now that are coming on the island because of all of our new neighbors. So we're getting a little more of the mainland intrusion of our ecosystem. Where I've had to explain to DNR, you got these buses over here that's emitting these smog and smoke and so as soon as I bring it to their attention, they'll either get it fixed or take it off the island. But why should we have to do that? Why? Because we've now become the gatekeepers as the Raccoon Hall Community Development Corporation. And our sister nonprofit as Help Org Inc., who is Pamela Flores, developed now West Side Atlanta Land Trust called WALT. Sapelo Island Ancestral Land Trust is called SALT. Well, these are the ways that we're finding to keep the aging residents in place, the in-place residents in place, to become more of a bank, a land bank, and an economic opportunity to say, I know I can build this house for this much money, and here's your land lease for that land. We're not talking about anything crazy, enough to sustain the land trust operations. That's it.
There you go.
and also the small business incubator, because we want to make sure that the false financial practices don't happen to us. You know, most black communities, if you hand a black man that doesn't know how to handle $100, $1 million, he's going to have some false financial practices in there. But if you hand a trained black man under financial understandings of how to operate 501c3s, for-profits that are advocate work, then we don't have that issue and can continue to receive funding because nobody can say the money was mishandled or misappropriated.
What are the next steps that are being taken right now as we speak to preserve this rich portion of history?
We're heading into trial against McIntosh County. That's our next step. McIntosh County, over a 50-year period, has not represented our taxes properly. On Sapelo Island, we pay a trash tax that the same people pay on the mainland, but we don't have a Herbie Kirby or pickup. We got to take our own trash to the dump in the back of your car, truck, or whatever you got. We're going over to this trial to make sure that some of these, as litigation reference points, are handled so that, again, the population throughout this Southeast coast can look at these reference points in these litigative efforts and say, hey, I can do that, or call us. Raccoon Hall Community Development Corporation has an open line for all listeners to call us in any state, and our reference point is public policy before litigation. But now that we've been in for 13 years, we have a number of litigators who are on our side at our beck and call and saying, you build the case, Raccoon Hall Community Development Corporation, we'll take it on. And I know how to build a case, sir.
Mr. Hall, as you've lived your life, being ever so grateful to your ancestors, to pass down the most treasured gift of them all, in my mind, land, real estate, prosperity and property, so to speak, going through this fight to keep your own land and what you've had to endure for a long time, what's been the biggest lesson you've learned about yourself thus far?
Brother Eddie, that's a loaded question. I've changed my life, brother. When my elders and my father called me in 2007 to come do this, it was at 9:16 p.m. August 17th. I got on a plane August 18th, 2007. I haven't stopped.
From where?
My home base is Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where my family is. When I look at the elders before me, the Dr. Kings, the Malcolm X's, all of the brothers who were willing to give their life, to answer your question directly, I'm willing to die for this. So that changed me like you would have never imagined. I no longer spend money on non-imperative things. I no longer, man, I got to tell you, I'm all the way down to driving my 1994 when at one point I, would buy anything. And I literally have found peace as a reference point for my soul. And now there's no retirement date for me. You know that. Your brother, Big Gregory, said, the most dangerous thing in the universe is to put on the glasses. He said two things about that. You can't take them off and you can't make nobody else wear them. And I'm listening to these brothers, the brother Fuller, the brothers who's talking to us from yesteryear, and I'm following their model. You give up your life, as Uncle Malcolm said, it's not a revolution unless you are willing to die and or kill. It's not an important part to me for anybody to lose their life, but the things that they've done to me in the last 13 years, took my rear differential cap off my trucks going down the highway, I lock up, broke into my home, stole my handgun, trying to put a body on me, didn't know I had it registered, tried to charge me with 2 felony charges, arson charges. None of it stuck because the day that I brought 9 federal agencies to this island, all charges dropped. Anything they can do, put snakes in my boat. Now, if you ever been a waterman, don't no snake crawl up no side of no boat. And we don't park our boat under no trees because we got more sense than that. Right. So these are the type of things that they attempt to do to stop the truth. But if I were to be specific, how did this truly impact my life? I believe more wholeheartedly in the ancestors being around me more than ever, because I know the only reason I'm alive down here in the low country of Georgia, in the worst county you could possibly think of being in as a black man, to tell the truth against the white man. I should be dead, but I know the ancestors not going to let that happen. And I've watched them not let it happen, or else I'd be under the jail right now. Only because that's what they do. You know, from the 1800s, how many of our legislators were put in prisons and all of that because they were becoming more powerful inside of legislation, because the white man didn't understand how this was truly going to impact them on a federal level. So all the way back from the 1800s, they've been killing the truth tellers, and I'm prepared to die, sir.
It's Reginald Hall, a descendant, resident, and critical stakeholder of Sapelo Island, located about 60 miles south of Savannah, Georgia. And he's also an advocate of the Gullah Keezy community for civil and human rights, and one of dozens of residents looking to hold on to their land, their culture, and their livelihood. Reginald Hall, thank you for being a guest on ICU.
Thank you, Brother Eddie Robinson. I appreciate you.
Our team includes technical director Todd Holzlander, producer Laura Burks, editors Mark DeClaudio and John Mitchell Good, sound designer Dave McDermott. ICU is a production of Houston Public Media. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. And for more updates and episodes, visit our website, iseeushow.org. I'm your host and executive producer, Eddie Robinson. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, I feel you, we hear you, I see you. Until next time.